Whether you're a cradle Catholic or a new convert, we all have questions about our faith traditions. From the history, to the prayers, to the culture it's inspired, there's so much to explore. To help us make sense of it all, I'll be talking to the experts at the Church of St. Paul the Apostle in New York City to get to the heart of how to live out our sacred and ancient faith in the modern world. No matter how long you've been journeying with Christ, we could all use a bit more practice. I'm Jack Schneider, and this is Practicing Catholic. Hi everybody, welcome back to Practicing Catholic. Today I'm excited to bring on my first ever repeat guest, Father Evan Cummings.
Glad to be here.
If you remember from last time, Father Evan is the Associate Director at Busted Halo and has previously served as the Associate Pastor here at the Church of St. Paul the Apostle, as well as at the Ohio State University. Father, welcome back.
Thank you, glad to be here again.
And for regular watchers of the show, you may notice that we are not in our normal filming location. Father, where are we?
I don't know, I'm lost. No, I can't. No, we are currently in the vesting sacristy in the back of the Church of St. Paul the Apostle. So the sacristy here is actually quite large and we have a main room and a room for the vessels, and then we have this room, which is for the priests to get vested in, to get ready for Mass.
So today we're going to talk about all sorts of vestments that priests wear. So just at the very beginning, priestly vestments in general, I know there's some discussion of it in Exodus. Is that where a lot of our current priestly vestments come from?
No, actually. What's interesting is there are priestly vestments there, and it's a common thing to talk about across cultures where it's like, you have sort of the cultic class. I'm not using cult in a negative, pejorative term, but just in that sense of that worship. It's not uncommon to find vestments, think of like ancient Rome and obviously ancient Israel, everyone had vestments. And so it was just kind of natural for the early Christians to be like, oh, well, our priests should have something special that they wear too. There are certainly symbolic allusions to Exodus and to the high priesthood mentioned there, but it's not as though the early Christians read that passage and said, oh, okay, we're gonna need one of these, two of those, and 7 of those, because why not? No, it wasn't quite like that.
So let's say it's a normal Sunday. You're getting ready for Mass. What are you putting on? What are the layers of the normal Mass?
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe the best way to just kind of talk about the layers is just kind of walking through them one by one and a little bit of their history and their meaning. I have already set up kind of various vestments that you would expect to see various priests wear, especially maybe here at St. Paul the Apostle. And behind you are the old vesting prayers. These aren't used anymore since the Second Vatican Council, but we still have the old sign and it looks nice. So, and it does remind us of the importance of, that even vesting can be a prayer itself in preparing ourselves to do this. So the first thing that we put on in terms of vestments is kind of our base layer, and that's called an alb. The Latin is albus. Any guesses as to what albus might mean?
No idea.
It means white.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess that makes sense.
Yep. Literally, the name of this vestment is white, and that's the just ankle-length white tunic that a priest or really any server in the church would wear. And there are many different styles with these that we can see throughout history. But what it started as was a tunic. And that's kind of a thing we'll see over and over again with a lot of these vestments, is that it started as something very mundane and then kind of took on meaning. So at the time of the early church in Rome, what we would now call an alb or tunic was just kind of what people wore. This is just like your everyday wear. So it would just be, they'd have it on. And I'm going to take my microphone off for a moment so you don't get the ruffling sounds. But now, they probably wouldn't have snaps. It would probably just be a over the head kind of thing. But yeah, it's just a tunic. That's all it started as. Now, the whites came on to symbolize, our baptisms being washed whiter than snow by the blood of the Lamb, as we hear in several parts of Scripture, and took on that symbolic nature. But again, at its core, it's just what people wore. And so there's actually a thing wherein priests in the early church would wear this day in and day out because it was what they wore. Bishops were concerned about it getting dirty all the time, especially as it started to take on that symbolism of that newness of life, etc., and that it should be really saved for special occasions. Because, let's face it, you probably only have one in the ancient world. And that's actually where the cassock comes in, or various habits. It was basically, okay, well, we'll make one of these as our base layer, but make it black so that when it gets dirty, it doesn't show up. And then we'll save the white one for special occasions, for the liturgy, for the Mass, for the celebrations, so that it can stay white and stay looking clean.
Yeah, and is that why to this day priests generally wear black?
That is, it was originally just, again, it was a very practical thing of just like, okay, we got to wear black so that the stains don't show up. But it took on a meaning and symbolism of like dying to self and humility, and it adopted some of that over time. And another vestment that kind of ties into that was actually what's known as an amice. So this isn't too common anymore because many albs will have like a high collar to hide your clothes, but older designs might have like a big square yoke. And this was just to hide your clothes, but also to be a bit of a sweat cloth, to keep a barrier between your skin and the vestments so that, it didn't ruin them. But its actual origins, likely, because some of this is conjecture, there aren't the most solid written records, but what it started as was a hood. And we see this in the way that it would be put on for centuries is you'd first put it on your head, and then you'd wrap it around your neck, kind of tightly, and then tying it around. But it likely was, at one point, if I don't get tangled in the strings, started out as a hood that became separated. And again, has just a practical function, because it's a hood. It's going to rain, It's going to be windy. So,
And we might get to this a little bit more later, but a lot of religious orders have specific some wear hoods. Is that where that comes from, or is that from something else?
It's probably separate, but not entirely. Like, hoods just had a functional reality. Think of just peasant garb in the Middle Ages in Europe. It's just like a hood is a hood is a hood. Everyone probably owns one that like they could separate from their clothes just for the purpose of having it for when it was cold or windy or wet or whatever. So it's not necessarily that it came from the habits, habits being the distinctive garb of a religious order, but more that it was kind of parallel tracks of, a hood's useful to have. So the next part that we put on, if you wouldn't mind handing me that rope, this rope is called a cincture. What do you think it symbolizes?
Are you tied to Christ?
Oh, that's a good one. I haven't heard that one. No, it's not that. At its core, it's a belt. It keeps your vestments, keeps your alb from flopping about. I lost control there. But it's come to symbolize sort of chastity. Scripture mentions girding your loins. So it's come to be sort of a physical reminder maybe of the vow of chastity of the clergy, but also, if a server who is, maybe married or not or whatever, it's still a reminder of the way that we're called all to have a chaste heart in love of Christ and one another. So it does sort of have a universality beyond just the ordained clergy. But at its core, again, is mundane beginnings, a belt.
All right, and then what is the final piece of this?
Oh, there's two more pieces.
Okay.
We're not quite.
Let's not get ahead of myself.
We're not quite done yet. So what a priest would wear at Mass, the outer vestment that you would be used to seeing, a chasuble. This is rather a large one. I did that intentionally. But first what we've got to put on is the stole. Would you hold that?
Yep.
He stole my stole. Thank you. So the stole actually comes later in history than the chasuble. And when the stole was introduced, what it was actually a symbol in the imperial court of what your rank was. And how you wore it symbolized that. So if you were lowest rank in the imperial court, you might wear it over your shoulder like a sash. If you were middle rank, you would wear it in front, but you would cross it. I hope that's not hitting the mic too much. You'd cross it, and if you were the highest rank, you would wear it straight. And so for centuries, that's actually the way that deacons, priests, and bishops would wear their stole respectively. And deacons still wear their stole that way. Now, priests and bishops both wear their stole straight down, but it is a symbol of kind of that yoke of Christ, and it is taken from a secular place of authority and saying, there is an authority that the ordained have in the life of the church, not to be oppressive or controlling by any means, but we are entrusted to serve the people of God, and to serve requires an authority sometimes. So it's also kind of reminding of us the weight that is upon our shoulders to serve the people. Now, when it was introduced, the Pope at the time, whose name I do not remember because I do not have the order of all 267 popes memorized. I have the last 6 memorized, I think. Anyway, when it was introduced, he was like, okay, cool, we can have this, but you're going to leave the chasuble on top because the chasuble is a symbol of charity, and charity should cover and overflow above authority.
And I've also noticed too that sometimes for other sacraments the priests will wear the stole, like if they're hearing confessions or.
Yes. So I'll hold on to this chasuble for this moment, for this question. So what the chasuble is only for Mass. It is not to be used for any other sacramental function. So we don't wear it if we're just doing a baptism, if we're hearing confessions, if we're doing anointing of the sick. We'll wear a stole as a symbol of our authority, but the chasuble is a priestly symbol only for the celebration of the Eucharist. So I'm going to take this off for a moment because this is quite large, and putting on a chasuble is always you learn how to put them on in seminary. I kid you not, that is part of what you learn. So we'll clip that maybe about like that. It won't look the best, but it'll serve the function. So now I would be vested to celebrate Mass in ordinary time, as I'm wearing green. But yeah, the chasuble is sort of the symbol of the priest in many ways. And what I love about it is the origin of its name. Its original name in Latin was cassula. Do you know what cassula means?
I do not.
That's okay. You might hear the cognate in cassula of casa, as it has the same root. Do you know a little Spanish?
Oh, like a house?
House.
Yes.
Cassula means little house.
Oh, okay.
Because when it was first sort of new to the world, before it even had any connections to liturgy, it was a raincoat.
Huh.
Believe it or not, they were wool raincoats. So where the chasuble kind of goes all the way down to the ankles, but then has openings on the side, the original ones would just kind of go that same length all the way around. It would just kind of be like a little tent you'd wear, made of wool. So it would be a raincoat.
Yeah.
And honestly, it worked. Now this got introduced at one point in the Roman Senate. It actually replaced the toga as the symbol of the authority. And so what we think happened was the early church went, well, if the civil authorities are wearing that, then we who are the spiritual authorities and serve the higher God, who serve the real God, we're going to wear that, and we're going to be sort of senators of the high court of Christ. And so you'll find images very early on, great mosaics all over the world of Christian ministers wearing the chasuble. But yeah, it's a little house. Right. Keeps you warm, keeps you dry.
And you had mentioned green for ordinary time. Could you run through the different liturgical colors and their significance?
Absolutely. So green is for ordinary time. Ordinary coming from the Latin ordinal, meaning to count. It's not that this time is, this is a time down, we're just going through. No, we're counting between basically Pentecost and Advent. And it's just like, okay, well, that's the first week, it's the second week. Anyway, so green was kind of the chosen color for that. Purple has long since been a color of penance and also a bit of royalty, but mostly that sense of penance, that sense of, it's a dark color. It reminds us of our mortality in many ways, of our sinfulness. That's why we wear it for the sacrament of reconciliation. So we wear that for Lent and Advent. For great celebrations, we'll wear white. So Easter, Christmas, feast days. And certain days we'll also wear red. So days of martyrs, Good Friday, Palm Sunday, and the red is a reminder of the blood of Christ and the blood of the martyrs. And so you'll see that one throughout the year as well. So statistically speaking, green's the one you're going to see the most, but it's probably the one that has the least sort of initial meaning to it, because it is just in that ordinal time of counting. So yeah.
And you had mentioned a lot about how this kept people warm historically, etc. Is there any leeway that, here we are in the Northeast, you can wear something a little bit heavier and it's fine. Is there any leeway for maybe if somebody is a priest in a hotter climate?
Yeah.
Are there thinner materials?
Yeah, and that's part of where like lace comes in. So you might see albs with like some lace on it. It's ventilation is what it is first and foremost. But yeah, you might see in northern climates in Europe in the Middle Ages, larger chasubles like this one made of wool, where it's like, okay, it's cold in that church. I'd want to be bundled up. But in Italy, where it's going to be hot and it's going to be sunny, they would actually have a different style of chasuble that we now call the fiddleback. You might see it commonly used by like the people who celebrate the traditional Latin Mass, the Tridentine Rite. But it's the one where it's like just straight down from the shoulders. And what happened historically is basically the sleeves kept getting shorter and shorter because priests were hot, and they're just like snip, 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 snip. And eventually it just got to the point where it was only about, yay from the shoulder, to the point that a pope actually had to step in and say, there needs to be a minimum width on the shoulder, because if it's not going to count as a chasuble, and you can't validly celebrate Mass without it. So he kind of had to step in and say, there is a limit. But there was sort of that historical development allowing for a different climate to say, okay, maybe a big wool little house would be too much. We need something a little breezier and a little lighter.
Right. And you had mentioned a little bit of the development of these different vestments. If you were to get in a time machine, let's say, how far could somebody go back, see a priest saying Mass, and recognize them as a Catholic priest?
Probably as early as the 3rd century, maybe even 2nd century. Exactly when the chasuble itself would have been introduced, again, we don't have hard, fast dates. We kind of have guesses from some like mosaic work, but this is likely to have been introduced pretty early on. Now, the apostles celebrating Masses in people's homes, and we see that in the early church, maybe less so. But yeah, pretty early on at least, definitely the chasuble would have been worn. And what was interesting is in the early church when it was first introduced, is it would be worn by bishops, priests, and deacons. They'd all be wearing the same thing.
So there wasn't as much separation of rank as there is today?
No, not necessarily that there wasn't a separation of rank, but so much as there was a commonality of this is just what a sacred minister, regardless of rank, wears. And how they would wear it may vary depending on their functions. So sometimes, guys might have it all like bundled up in the front and hanging off their shoulders so that their arms are free so they could set the altar. And maybe that took on a symbolism. Again, something mundane becomes symbolic later.
Interesting. And as we had kind of touched on before, and I'm sure if anyone's been seeing the coverage of our new Pope, they show a lot of pictures of him, during his time as an Augustinian, and they wear a very distinctive habit. Are all religious orders kind of permitted to? Are they given some sort of leeway?
Yeah, so all religious orders are allowed to have a habit essentially, and are able to sort of define what it is in their founding. Not all orders do, though. The Jesuits, most notably, our order of our previous Pope, Pope Francis, have no habit. They would simply wear a cassock or clerical clothes as appropriate to the day and place that they're serving. But some orders have taken on a habit, and it's very specific that it's like it has this symbolism and it has this origin, and others are, well, this is what we adopted at the time and what we have stuck with.
Do the Paulists?
We do in fact have our own habit here. So it is a modified version of a cassock. What's notable about it is it has 5 buttons across the right breast. These do not symbolize anything, because what's interesting is this design was actually taken from what the seminarians in Rome would wear. Because in Rome, there's seminarians from all over the world. And basically each sort of nationality would have a distinctive outfit. So when they were all gathered together, they'd be like, oh, you're from Scotland. Oh, you're from England. Oh, you're from America. And this is like what modified from what priests or guys training to become priests in America would wear. And so Isaac Hecker was like, well, if that's what priests in America are wearing or getting ready to wear, we should wear that. And then the collar itself is kind of a modified version of a Redemptorist collar, all 5 of our founders being Redemptorist priests before founding the Paulist Fathers. So,
And is there any religious order that you think has, a habit that's particularly interesting? Do you have a favorite?
I mean, I am a little partial to the Paulist one as a Paulist. I don't know. There's just like a lot of really interesting history over the use of various symbols and what they come to mean and change over time that I don't really have like a favorite. It's just like, I love physical, I don't know if archaeology or whatnot would be the right word, but just that sense of like studying how we as people use things and like how we apply meaning to it, I find really fascinating. And there's a lot going on in vestments. I mean, we went over just what a priest wears. You know, I didn't even mention what a deacon wears or what a priest might wear outside of Mass.
And is there ever a time, because I mean, most of the time you see most of the Paulists and they're, wearing the normal Roman collar. Are there special occasions where you'd wear the cassock, or is it just anytime you'd like?
Yeah, I mean, a little column A, a little column B. So I know Father Jack tends to prefer to wear his wear his habit sometimes just because he likes that sort of outward sign of Paul's visibility. I myself, I typically only wear it for special occasions. So as we're filming this, we're getting ready for the ordination, and I'll be emceeing the ordination, so I'll wear it for that. But if I were to preach a mission, if I was invited somewhere, I might wear it.
So as you mentioned, we do have ordination coming up here. So are there any moments during ordination that people should kind of look out for vestments-wise? Is there ever a point at which the new priest receives a vestment or anything like that? Yeah,
so there is a specific point. So the guys to be ordained are currently deacons. So they'll be wearing, I'll grab a deacon stole I have here. So a deacon's stole, as I talked about earlier, would go across the shoulder and down to the hip. So they'll come in and they'll just be wearing that. If a deacon is serving at Mass, he would wear the full dalmatic, which is this sleeved tunic, so you can tell it's different from our priest because it has the sleeves, whereas a priest just, we just have drapery. But yeah, so they'll come in wearing that, and then after the laying on of hands, which will be done by the bishop and all the priests present, there will be a prayer of ordination, and it's in that prayer that we as Catholics believe that they have now been ordained and become priests. As a sign of that, they'll stand up, because they've been kneeling at this point, they'll stand up and other priests will help them get vested as priests for the first time. So they'll take off their deacon stole, they'll put on a priest's stole, they'll put on the chasuble, and that happens very visibly. It's up on the altar, and that's kind of like the big key turning point in the liturgy of like, okay, they walked in as deacons, now they're gonna forever walk out as priests.
And having gone through that yourself, having been in that moment, is like, what does that feel like? You're now wearing the priest?
Yeah, I mean, just trying to think back 6 years. There was so much going on in that day that was just a lot to take in. I think for myself, it was just kind of an affirmation of what I had felt called to do and had been striving to do. That it was almost like a sense of being embraced by both community in terms of like all the people present, the Paulist community, and also by God, sort of being draped and having this weight put upon me, not as a burden, but as a sort of like a blanket of comfort of like, you've done it, you've gotten to this point.
As I'm kind of looking like off camera here, I see that there are a lot of stoles. You have various different patterns and colors. Do you have a lot of leeway with the stole that you wear, or?
Sometimes, I mean, so long as it's like within the color, it counts. You can't be wearing bright orange or something. But typically, all the chasubles will have a stole with them that A, matches and looks good, but B, also just kind of make sure that it's there as a set. The ones you're seeing off camera are typically used for special occasions like celebrating a baptism or concelebrating. Because if you're concelebrating, you're probably not wearing a chasuble just because we don't have enough for every priest present. So you wear at least a stole. So we have those present to wear for that, as well as other occasions. If you're going somewhere and gonna be like visiting another place, you might need to take a stole.
We have 20 priests in residence here at St. Paul's. A lot of different people giving Mass. Do you have like a particular chasuble, particular stole, or are they all kind of communal?
Yeah, so anything in here is communal, except for our albs. Those are marked by name. But anything here is communal. Now, individuals may have, maybe they've received a chasuble for a certain purpose, or like as a gift from someone. I've received one that was handmade by my mother, and I love it dearly. It's saved for weddings, because she made it like a hearts and cross design specifically for weddings. So I have that, but I keep it somewhere else so that it doesn't get caught up in the mix. The stoles here, are also common use, but it's not uncommon, again, for guys to receive a stole or have certain stoles. All of us have our Paulist stole for big con-celebration events, so we have those for when we need them. So there are also times and places to have something personal, but for the most part, if you're just going to celebrate Mass, you're just going to grab the one that's on the same hanger.
And when you're visiting another parish, let's say, do you just kind of take one off the rack and go, or do you bring one with you?
Yeah, it depends. Maybe if you're of a different stature, maybe you're a really tall guy or a really short priest, you may have like a chasuble where you're like, I know this fits me. I know my alb fits me. I always take my alb with me whenever I travel. But I may not take a chasuble, if I'm been asked to just celebrate Mass at another parish for just a Sunday, I'm going to trust that they have the vestments there and just show up and use what they have. So other things I have set out and I'll talk about, so I'll take this off for a moment. We'll do some editing magic.
So we've talked a lot about the vestments that are for Mass. What about outside of Mass? Are there any other vestments?
Yeah, so probably the main vestment you'll see outside of Mass is called the cope, and not because the priest is just trying to cope with everything that's going on in their life, but what it is a cape. Cope is cape. It usually, again, has a stole with it. Also, I don't know if I talked about this, but priests and deacons always kiss the stole when we put it on as a sign of remembering that this is a gift from God and a sign of reverence to what He has entrusted us. But you will see copes most commonly, maybe if there's like a procession or something, but most commonly maybe a baptism, or I'm going to move this. Yeah, you'll see copes maybe for like a procession or Eucharistic adoration or a baptism or a sacrament celebrated outside of Mass but kind of publicly. So like maybe someone has a wedding coming up and the groom is Catholic but the bride is Jewish, and so they want a ceremony, but they don't want to have a Mass because that would feel weird to have the family there. So they would still have a Catholic ceremony, or could have a Catholic ceremony, I should say. And the priest could wear the cope as a sign of, who he is as a priest presiding over that. And kind of along with the cope, particularly for Eucharistic adoration, is the humeral veil, or the veil of humility, as it's quite literally translated to. I'm going to step aside for a moment there. And what this is again, it's one of those things that started out as a mundane thing and became symbolic. It's a cloth so that you can handle fine vessels like a monstrance or other vessels for Mass without getting your oils on them, without getting your handprints all over them, making them dirty. Now, it has come to be a symbol of like humility and saying, as I'm giving the blessing with the monstrance, I'm not doing the blessing, Christ is. I'm just the physical motor for the moment. So we have the humeral veil as well, and you'll see that also on Holy Thursday and Good Friday as we move the stuff around. But yeah, so you'll sometimes see the cope and the humeral veil for various functions, like I said, especially for Eucharistic adoration. But yeah, I think that's kind of the long and skinny of the vestments that you would see priests and deacons wear on a regular basis. We could go even more in depth on what bishops might wear, but we don't have any bishops' presence, and we don't have any of what they would wear around when we have bishops come and do things like we had confirmation last night before filming this. They got to bring their own stuff. They got to bring their own mitre. They got to bring their own crozier. We don't have that ready for you.
All right. Father Evan, thank you so much. Any final thoughts?
No, I think that's everything. Again, I think vestments are just a great sign of beauty in the world, honestly. Like a well-made vestment is just like always nice to look at, but also a symbol of what God has given us, both individually as maybe members of the clergy, but also within the life of the community to say, hey, God so loves us that he's like, hey, here are people to celebrate these sacraments and bring us together in these moments of prayer. Here's a visible sign to remind us all of that.
All right. Father Evan, thank you so much for your time.
You're most welcome. Thank you for having me.